The chandeliers of the Grand Regent Hotel scattered light like broken glass across polished marble floors. Seattle's elite glided through the ballroom, laughter and champagne rising together like smoke. In the corner, near the mirrored wall where no one bothered to look, stood Claire Holden, 28, overdressed in the cheapest black cocktail dress she owned, holding a clipboard like a shield. She wasn't one of them. She was there to translate them. Claire worked as a freelance sign language interpreter, hired for the annual Children's Hospital charity gala. Her job was to stand nearby in case someone needed her, to smile quietly, to vanish when the rich began talking about art auctions and startup acquisitions. Her agency coordinator's words echoed in her head. Blend in, Claire, be invisible. For most of the evening, she managed that perfectly. No one noticed her. Not the servers rushing between tables, not the donors shaking hands under the chandeliers, not even the other staff members. But then she saw the girl. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, in a midnight blue gown, stood half-hidden behind a marble column. While clusters of people laughed and toasted under the glittering light, she stood utterly still, watching the movement of lips and gestures with an intensity that felt out of place. Something in her posture stopped Claire cold, the slight stiffness in her shoulders, the careful focus on mouths rather than eyes. Claire had seen that look before, in hospital waiting rooms, in classrooms, in children who had learned to live inside silence. The girl was deaf, and no one was talking to her. Claire hesitated, torn between professional distance and human impulse. Then the crowd shifted, a ripple of excitement spreading like a wave. Cameras flashed. The guest of honor had arrived. Daniel Mercer, founder of Mercer Technologies, billionaire philanthropist, the man whose donations had built entire hospital wings, entered the ballroom surrounded by admirers. He was tall, confident, with that easy authority people mistake for warmth. His smile was practiced, his handshake deliberate. Everyone wanted to touch a piece of him, to glow in his reflected light. As Daniel moved through the room, Claire's gaze flicked back to the girl in blue. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same grey eyes, the same strong jawline. His daughter, Ava Mercer. While Daniel was engulfed by donors and photographers, Ava stood unnoticed in the corner, her expression unreadable. Pride mixed with resignation in her eyes, like someone watching a movie they'd already seen too many times. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. The disconnect between them was almost physical, like a wall of glass. Without overthinking, she crossed the room. When Ava noticed her approaching, her eyebrows lifted slightly, cautious but curious. Claire smiled and lifted her hands in greeting. "Hello," she signed, the movements fluid and confident. "I'm Claire. What's your name?" Ava's entire face transformed. The stillness broke. Her hands moved quickly, graceful and expressive. "Ava," she signed. "You know ASL?" "I do," Claire replied, fingers dancing through the words. "I work as an interpreter. Sometimes at the hospital your father supports." Ava nodded. "I'm supposed to stand here for photos later," she signed. "They said it's important for publicity." Her expression turned bitter for a heartbeat before she forced a polite smile back into place. Claire understood too well the mask people wear to survive. "Would you like some company that actually talks to you?" Claire signed. Ava laughed silently, her shoulders shaking. "God, yes. I've been lip-reading all night. People exaggerate their words like I'm 5, or shout." Claire grinned. "Or they talk to whoever's standing next to you instead of you." "Exactly," Ava replied, her hands moving faster now, freer. "Invisible girl with expensive earrings." They stood together, tucked away from the crowd, the rhythm of their conversation smooth and lively. Ava spoke about her school, Westridge Academy, where she was in her senior year. "It's mainstream, but there's a deaf program," she explained. "The hearing kids think I'm stuck up because of my last name, and the deaf kids think I'm privileged, so not exactly a social life." "That sounds lonely," Claire signed. Ava shrugged. "It is. But I paint. That helps. I'd love to see your work." Before Ava could reply, a new wave of flashes filled the ballroom. Daniel Mercer was being photographed with the mayor, smiling for a headline he didn't need. Ava's eyes drifted toward him, filled with something raw, longing tangled with resentment. "Your father seems busy," Claire signed carefully. Ava's smile thinned. "He's always busy. Mercer Technologies doesn't run itself, you know." The sarcasm barely masked her pain. Claire hesitated, then asked softly, "When did your mother pass away?" Ava's hands slowed. "When I was 7. Everything changed after that. Our house used to have music everywhere. My mom was a pianist. She used to show me how music felt, the vibrations through the floor, the way her face moved when she played. After she died, it all stopped. My dad buried himself in work. He wanted to fix me instead. The surgeries, the therapists, the specialists. He never learned to sign. Not one word." Claire's throat tightened. She'd seen neglect before, but never so quiet. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the noise. Daniel Mercer, standing beside a photographer and his sharp-looking assistant, called, "Ava, it's time for photos." His tone was calm, deliberate, each word exaggerated for her to read, but he didn't even glance at Claire. Ava's expression turned to stone. She signed quickly. "See what I mean? He doesn't even ask who you are." Then she walked toward her father, slipping into the perfect posture of a model daughter. Claire watched them pose together, the powerful man and the poised teenager, the image of connection masking the void between them. Later, when the speeches began and applause echoed through the ballroom, Claire found herself outside on the terrace. The city shimmered below in silver and blue. A few moments later, Ava appeared, leaning against the balustrade. Claire joined her. "Escaping?" she signed. "Just breathing," Ava replied. "Too many moving lips." The door opened again. Daniel stepped out. His face softened with concern, then hardened into confusion when he noticed Claire. "Ava, it's time to go," he said, not signing a word. Ava's shoulders fell. Claire looked from father to daughter, then made a decision that felt dangerous even as she acted on it. She spoke aloud while signing every word. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Claire Holden. I've been speaking with your daughter. She's remarkable." Daniel blinked, surprised by the directness. "You work for the event?" "Yes. But right now, I'm just someone who thinks you should know what you're missing by not talking to her." His jaw tightened. "Miss Holden, my relationship with my daughter is a private matter." "With respect, sir," Claire said, still signing for Ava. "Communication shouldn't be private. It should be possible." Ava looked alarmed. "Claire, it's okay," she signed quickly. "No," Claire replied. "It's not." Daniel's mask of control flickered, a brief flash of something like shame beneath it. "You've overstepped," he said quietly. "Ava, we're leaving." He turned and walked back inside. Ava hesitated, signing, "I'm sorry." He gets defensive. "It's been like this since the accident." "Accident?" Claire asked, but Ava was already moving away. "Find me at Westridge Academy," she signed before slipping through the door. Claire stood alone on the terrace, heart pounding, Seattle's night air cold against her skin. She'd crossed a line, and she knew it. The next morning, her phone buzzed, a voicemail from her agency. "Claire, call me back immediately. There's been a complaint about your behavior last night." Her stomach dropped. When she returned the call, her coordinator's voice was brisk. "Daniel Mercer's office called. They're requesting you for a private appointment at his home this afternoon." Claire froze. "They what?" "I don't know what you said to him," the coordinator continued, "but this could be huge for us. Don't mess it up." 3 hours later, Claire was driving through the iron gates of the Mercer estate toward the sprawling glass mansion overlooking Lake Washington, and for the first time since the gala, she wondered what exactly she had started. Rain streaked the windshield as Claire drove toward the Mercer estate, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tight enough to ache. She had replayed every moment from the gala a dozen times. The way she'd spoken up to Daniel Mercer, the look of shock on Ava's face, the cold finality in his voice. Now she was heading to his house, the kind of place people only saw on magazine covers. The Mercer estate sat on a rise above Lake Washington, its walls of glass and stone reflecting the grey sky like polished armor. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman in a tailored grey uniform greeted her. "Mr. Mercer is expecting you," the housekeeper said, her tone clipped but polite. Claire followed her through a hall lined with museum-quality paintings and minimalist furniture. As they passed a large abstract painting, blue and gold in sweeping strokes, the housekeeper said, "That one's Ava's work. She painted it last year." Claire slowed. The piece was bold, alive, and emotional in a way the house wasn't. "It's beautiful," she murmured. The woman nodded. "She's gifted." Then she opened a set of double doors. "Mr. Mercer will see you now." Daniel Mercer stood by a wide window overlooking the lake, his posture precise, hands resting on the edge of a sleek black desk. He turned as she entered. "Miss Holden," he said. His voice was measured, like every word had been weighed before leaving his mouth. "Mr. Mercer," Claire replied. She expected a lecture or a formal reprimand, maybe even an NDA slid across the desk. Instead, he gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming on short notice," he said. "I wasn't given much of a choice," she admitted, taking the chair opposite him. A faint smile touched his mouth, more acknowledgement than amusement. "I owe you an apology." Claire blinked. "I beg your pardon?" He clasped his hands together, looking down briefly. "Last night you spoke to me in a way that was inappropriate for the setting, but not inaccurate." The confession disarmed her. "Sir, I'm sorry if I overstepped." "It wasn't my place." "Perhaps it was exactly your place," he interrupted, meeting her eyes. "You're the professional, after all. You understand something I've ignored for too long." He paused, his gaze shifting toward the window. "Ava lost her hearing in the car accident that killed her mother. She was 7. The doctors told us it was permanent, the damage too severe. I spent 2 years chasing specialists around the world, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed." Claire remembered Ava's words from the gala. "He wanted to fix me." Daniel's expression tightened. "By the time I stopped searching, she and I barely spoke. Interpreters, tutors, therapists, people I paid to speak for me, to speak for her. Eventually, she stopped trying." He picked up a framed photo from his desk and turned it toward her. A younger Daniel stood beside a woman with warm eyes and a radiant smile. Between them, a little girl laughed into the camera. "My wife, Elise," he said quietly. "She was a concert pianist. She believed communication was the purest form of music. She taught Ava baby sign language before she could even walk." His voice grew softer. "After the accident, I sold the piano. I couldn't bear the sound anymore." The silence in the office felt heavy, charged with years of things unsaid. Claire spoke gently. "Ava mentioned that your house used to be full of music." Daniel looked up, startled. "She told you that?" "She did." He set the photograph back down with care, as if afraid it might shatter. "Elise used to say that real music isn't what you hear, it's what you feel. I forgot that." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a slow exhale, he said, "Miss Holden, I want to hire you, not as an interpreter, as a teacher." Claire frowned slightly. "A teacher?" "I want you to teach me sign language," he said simply. "I should have learned years ago. I want to communicate with my daughter directly. No intermediaries, no excuses." For once, she didn't know what to say. "Mr. Mercer, that's commendable, but ASL takes time, months, sometimes years, to learn fluently. It's not a quick fix. I'm prepared to commit to regular lessons, twice a week or more, depending on my schedule, for as long as it takes." He named a figure for compensation that made Claire's breath catch. It was more than she made in a month of freelance work. Still, money wasn't the reason she hesitated. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "After all this time, what changed?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "This," he said. He handed it to her. Inside, written in neat, confident handwriting, was a note. "Dad, I know you're angry about last night, but for 10 minutes someone actually saw me. Not as your deaf daughter, but as myself. Mom used to say healing begins when you're heard. I haven't been heard in a long time. Ava." When Claire looked up, Daniel's expression had softened. "I've spent years throwing money at her silence, donations, hospitals, research, all to make myself feel useful, but I never made the one investment that mattered." "It's not too late," Claire said. "Ava's still young. There's time." "She leaves for college next year," he replied. Harvard already accepted her early decision. I have less than a year to rebuild what I broke. Claire studied him carefully. The powerful businessman who intimidated half of Seattle now looked like a man stripped of armor. I'll teach you, she said, but you need to understand something. Learning ASL is one thing. Relearning your daughter is another. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. He stood, signaling the meeting was nearly over. Someone else would like to see you before you go. As if on cue, the door opened. Ava stepped into the office, her blue dress replaced by jeans and a sweatshirt. When she saw Claire, her eyes lit up. You came, she signed quickly. Your father invited me, Claire replied, signing the words clearly. Ava glanced between them, confusion written across her face. Why? She signed. Daniel cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. I'll let Miss Holden explain. I have a call in 5 minutes. He started toward the door, then paused. Ava, we'll talk later. After he left, Ava turned to Claire, her hands flying. What's going on? Am I in trouble for what happened last night? Claire shook her head. Neither of us is in trouble, she signed. Your father has hired me to teach him ASL. Ava froze, staring at her. You're joking. I'm not. He's serious. Her face was a mix of disbelief and something more fragile. Hope. He won't stick with it. He never does when it's about me. Maybe this time is different, Claire replied. Why would it be? Ava signed, her movements sharp, defensive. Because this time, Claire said gently, he's not trying to fix you. He's trying to fix himself. Ava's hands dropped, her expression uncertain. For a moment, the guarded teenager looked very young. If he's really going to learn, she signed quietly, then maybe there's still something left to save. She looked past Claire toward the door her father had just exited, and for the first time there was no bitterness in her eyes, only the faintest glimmer of possibility. Outside, the rain had stopped. The lake reflected a fragile patch of sunlight breaking through the clouds. And somewhere deep inside the Mercer mansion, a man who had forgotten how to listen was about to begin learning how to speak again. The first lesson took place 3 days later in Daniel Mercer's home office. Claire arrived early, her bag filled with flashcards, practice sheets, and the patient energy she reserved for students who didn't believe they could learn. The rain had returned to Seattle, steady and grey, tapping softly against the glass walls of the room. Daniel stood near his desk, sleeves rolled up, a notebook open in front of him. He looked more like a student preparing for a presentation than a man learning how to speak again. Where do we start? He asked, his tone businesslike. From the beginning, Claire said. Fingerspelling first. It's the alphabet of sign language. Once you learn that, we'll move to basic words. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. All right, let's begin. For the first hour, he approached the task the way he approached every challenge in his life, with absolute control. He copied each sign with precision, repeating them as though memorizing a code. But after 40 minutes, his movements grew rigid, mechanical, frustrated. He tried to spell meeting but fumbled halfway through. This is impossible, he said, dropping his hands. I'm too old for this. You learned Mandarin for business, Claire reminded him gently. That was different, he said. Then, realizing how it sounded, added, I was younger and it was important. Claire smiled faintly. You just said this isn't important. He exhaled sharply. That's not what I meant. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the invisible weight pressing down on him. You're trying too hard to be perfect, she said. This isn't about precision. It's about expression. Signing isn't typing. It's feeling. He looked at her, puzzled. Feeling? Yes. Ava will notice how you move, not just what you say. The smallest mistake doesn't matter if your intention is clear. He considered that, then raised his hands again. Slowly, carefully, he spelled out his name, Daniel, pausing between each letter. Good, Claire said. Now try a phrase, something you'd actually want to tell Ava. Daniel hesitated. Such as? Claire thought for a moment. How about, I'm proud of you? Every child needs to hear that. He frowned slightly. Does she think I'm not proud of her? When was the last time you told her? Claire asked. He didn't answer. She lifted her hands, demonstrating the sign. "Watch carefully. This is how you say it." He followed her movements, slower but accurate, his fingers uncertain. When he finished, she nodded. "That was good. Now, there's one more I want to teach you today. It's simple, but it matters." "What is it?" She raised her hand, thumb, pinky, and index finger extended. "I love you," she said quietly. He stared at the sign for a long moment before attempting it. His hand trembled slightly. After a few seconds, he dropped it, turning toward the window. "Mr. Mercer?" Claire said. He didn't face her when he answered. "I haven't said those words to Ava since Elise died." "Why not?" she asked softly. "Because every time I look at her," he said, voice low, "I see Elise. I see what I failed to protect." Claire said nothing. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. It carried the sound of truth finally spoken. When he turned back, his composure had returned, though his eyes looked older. "Let's continue," he said quietly. They practiced another half-hour before ending the lesson. When Claire left the house, the air outside smelled of wet cedar and rain. She felt the pull of empathy, stronger than she'd expected. Daniel Mercer was a man trying to rebuild something long after the foundation had cracked. 2 days later, the second lesson took place in the same office. This time, Daniel was waiting for her, signing "Good morning" the moment she entered. The movement was stiff, but it was progress. "Morning," Claire replied. "You've been practicing?" He nodded. "Ava tested me at breakfast, said my signs look like I'm conducting an orchestra." "Did she laugh?" "For the first time in a long while." "That's a start," Claire said, setting her materials down. "Let's build on that." They moved from basic phrases to conversational signs. Daniel struggled with fluidity, often stopping mid-motion to correct himself. When frustration rose again, Claire redirected him with calm authority. "You can't lead this like a business meeting. You have to let yourself be bad at it first." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I don't do bad very well." "I've noticed," she said. Something in his expression softened. "You remind me of Elise," he said suddenly. The comment caught her off guard. "Your wife?" "She was like that, honest but kind. She used to say the same thing. Stop trying to win at everything." "Did you listen?" He shook his head. "No." They both smiled faintly. Later in the lesson, when Daniel managed to complete an entire sentence without hesitation, he looked genuinely proud. "How do I say, 'I missed you'?" he asked. Claire showed him the motion, gentle and fluid. "It's about emotion, not speed," she explained. He repeated it slowly, and something in his face changed, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the practiced control. "That's good," she said quietly. He lowered his hands. "Do you think she'll believe me if I say it?" "If you mean it, yes." After the lesson, Claire walked through the hallway toward the front door. As she passed the painting Ava had made, she noticed Daniel had moved it to a more prominent place on the wall. The colors, deep cobalt and gold, caught the light reflecting softly onto the marble floor. At the same moment, footsteps echoed behind her. Daniel had followed her out. "Miss Holden," he said, his voice quieter now. "Thank you for not treating me like a client." She turned slightly. "Then what am I treating you like?" He hesitated before answering. "Like someone who might still have a chance to make things right." Claire met his gaze. "Then don't waste it." As she stepped outside, the rain had eased to a mist. She stood for a moment, looking back at the mansion reflected in the lake. Behind its glass walls, a man who once built empires was learning the fragile language of forgiveness, one sign at a time. That evening, Claire met Ava for coffee near Westridge Academy. The girl was already at a corner table, sketchbook open beside her drink. When she saw Claire, she smiled. "You're late," Ava signed teasingly. "I had to finish a lesson," Claire signed back. "Your father's making progress." Ava rolled her eyes. "Progress? That's a generous word." "He's learning faster than most adults," Claire said. "He's trying." Ava's hands paused midair. "He approaches everything like a project. Study it, fix it, move on." Maybe this time the goal isn't to fix, Claire replied. Maybe it's to understand. Ava's expression softened, though her eyes carried doubt. We'll see, she signed. They talked for nearly an hour, about art, about silence, about how people confuse quiet with peace. Claire listened more than she spoke, sensing in Ava the same ache she'd seen in Daniel, two halves of a broken song trying to find harmony again. When they parted, the evening sky glowed with streaks of violet and grey. Claire walked away with a feeling she couldn't name, hope, maybe, or fear that hope might hurt more than despair. The lessons became a rhythm. Tuesday and Friday afternoons, rain or shine, Claire would arrive with her worn leather bag and find Daniel already waiting, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, the air in his office carrying a quiet focus that had nothing to do with business. By the third week, he could hold a simple conversation in sign language. The stiffness of his gestures had softened. His hands began to move with rhythm rather than calculation. One afternoon, as sunlight broke through the clouds and spread gold across the lake, Daniel signed, "How are you?" with surprising ease. Claire smiled. "Better," she signed back. "You?" He hesitated, then signed slowly. "Tired, but proud." Out loud, he added, "Ava laughed this morning. I asked her if she wanted pancakes, and she told me, 'Only if you don't burn them again.' She said it in sign. My daughter made fun of me. It felt normal." Claire laughed softly. "That's a good sign. No pun intended." He smiled faintly. "You know, when Elise was alive, breakfast used to be the only time the house had any noise. She'd hum while cooking. Ava would bang a spoon on the table like she was keeping rhythm. After the accident, mornings became silent." His gaze drifted toward the window, the sunlight glinting off his watch. "I used to sit in the kitchen staring at the piano across the room. Couldn't touch it, couldn't stand the sound. I thought silence would protect me from the pain, but all it did was make it louder." Claire spoke quietly. "Grief echoes, even in silence." He looked at her then, studying her face, as though trying to decide whether she truly understood. "I think," he said, "that's why I stopped trying to talk to Ava, because she reminded me that Elise wasn't coming back." Claire didn't respond right away. Her instinct was to comfort him, but she'd learned that grief often wanted witness, not repair, so she simply nodded. "Let's take a short break," she said after a moment. "Then I want to teach you something new, facial expressions. ASL uses the whole body, not just the hands." When the break ended, she showed him how to change tone with movement, how to express curiosity, sarcasm, surprise. Daniel raised an eyebrow, attempting sarcasm. "You expect me to perform now?" he said dryly. "Communication is performance," Claire replied, smiling. "You've been doing it your whole life. Board meetings, interviews, public speeches." He shook his head with a faint grin. "You make me sound like a politician." "Not at all," she said. "Politicians talk to be heard. You're learning to talk to listen." He paused mid-sign, the words settling between them. Then with a quiet nod he said, "That's the hardest part." As the afternoon faded into early evening, Claire packed her materials. Daniel walked her to the door as usual. But before she left, he said, "Miss Holden, Claire, thank you for being patient. I wasn't always like this. I used to know how to connect with people." She turned toward him, her tone calm. "Then you already have what you need. You just buried it under guilt." He looked startled for a moment, then exhaled a laugh, not defensive but real. "You don't pull punches, do you? Not when the truth's trying to get your attention." That evening, Daniel stood alone in his study, staring at the family photograph on his desk. He practiced the signs Claire had taught him. His hands trembled slightly when he shaped the words, "I love you." Across the city, Claire sat in her small apartment, watching rain trace patterns on the window. She replayed the day's lesson in her mind. Something about Daniel's vulnerability unsettled her. It wasn't romantic, but deeply human. The way someone rebuilding their voice seemed suddenly fragile. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ava. "Hey," it read, "thanks for not giving up on him." Claire typed back, "He's trying, that's what matters." Ava's reply came quickly. He told me he burned the pancakes again. I told him he's hopeless. Claire smiled. He said you laughed. Ava. Yeah, it felt weird, but good weird. Claire. That's progress. Ava didn't reply for a while. When she did, the message was short. He used to play piano for my mum every night. After she died, he had it removed from the house. I think that's when everything went quiet. Claire stared at the message, the words echoing the story Daniel had told her earlier. Two people mourning the same woman, trapped in the same silence, each believing the other didn't want to speak. The next morning, Claire returned for another lesson. Daniel seemed distracted, his movements slower. Rough night? She asked. I dreamed of the accident again, he said. Elise was driving that night. It was raining. Ava was asleep in the back seat. We were arguing, nothing serious, just about my schedule. I looked away for 2 seconds. The headlights came out of nowhere. He stopped there, his voice faltering. Claire waited, letting the quiet fill the room. I told everyone it was the other driver's fault, Daniel continued, but deep down I know I could have stopped it. I could have told Elise to pull over. I could have driven slower. Every decision since that night has been about erasing that one. He turned toward her, eyes tired. You ever carry something like that, Claire? Something you'd give anything to undo? She thought of her father, how she'd left home at 19 and never gone back, how he'd died 2 years later before she could reconcile. Yes, she said finally, and the only thing harder than carrying it is pretending you're not. Daniel nodded slowly. You're right. For a while they worked in silence. Then Claire signed, Let's end on something simple today. Show me how to say, I'm listening. He followed her gestures carefully, his movements slower but sure. When he finished, she said, Good. That's what Ava needs to see. Not a perfect signer, just someone willing to listen. That evening, Daniel sat with Ava in the living room. The piano had been replaced by an empty wall and a framed photo of Elise. Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching. Daniel hesitated before signing, How was school? Ava looked up, surprised. You're signing, she replied with her hands. Trying, he signed back, smiling faintly. Her eyes softened. You're getting better. I have a good teacher, he said aloud, making sure she could read his lips. She gestured teasingly. You still move like a robot. He laughed quietly. I'll work on that. For the first time in years, they shared silence that didn't hurt. Later, as Claire drove home, she thought of the scene she'd probably never see, father and daughter, sitting together in the quiet, the air between them finally beginning to move again. The road shimmered with rain, streetlights stretching across the wet pavement like threads of gold. Something inside her felt different, lighter though she couldn't say why. Maybe because silence, once broken, doesn't go back to being empty. It carries the sound of what it took to shatter it. And in the Mercer house by the lake, that sound had finally begun to rise. The morning light over Lake Washington was thin and cold, filtering through grey clouds that looked almost metallic. Inside the Mercer house, something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. The silence no longer felt absolute. It was softer, alive with movement, the quiet rhythm of hands learning to speak again. Claire arrived for the next lesson to find Ava waiting for her in the foyer. The girl's expression was a mix of curiosity and something sharper. My father said you're coming 3 times a week now, Ava signed as Claire set down her bag. That's the plan, Claire replied, moving her hands with an easy rhythm. He's learning faster than he thinks. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. He always learns fast. It's staying interested, that's the problem, Claire smiled. You don't believe he'll follow through. I believe he feels guilty, Ava signed quickly. That's different. Before Claire could answer, Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a stack of papers in one hand. Good morning, he said. His voice was calm, deliberate. Then to Ava he signed, Coffee? Ava blinked, caught off guard. Sure, she signed back. Claire watched them exchange the simple phrase, the smallest bridge between them forming in the air. During the lesson, Daniel struggled to remember a new set of verbs, Want, need, love, understand. His concentration was absolute, but his frustration simmered beneath the surface. Again, Claire said gently, you signed need when you meant love. He sighed. They look too similar. They feel different, she replied. When you sign love, your hand rests near the heart. It's not about the motion, it's about the meaning. He tried again, slower this time, and Claire nodded. That's better. After an hour, Ava wandered into the room carrying her sketchbook. She sat quietly in the corner, pretending to draw. But Claire noticed her eyes flicking up every few seconds. Daniel noticed too. Without prompting, he turned toward his daughter and signed, "How are you today?" Ava's hands paused over the page. "Good," she signed cautiously. "Tired. Exams next week." "You'll do great," he signed. His expression was careful but sincere. Ava's lips curved into a small smile. "Maybe, if I pass calculus." Daniel chuckled softly. "You will. You're like your mother. She hated math, but always found a way to win." At the mention of her mother, Ava's expression shifted, fragile for a moment before she looked down. "I don't remember her voice," she signed slowly. "I remember her laugh, but not her voice." Daniel's hands stilled midair. He didn't answer. Claire felt the air change, heavy again with unsaid things. She stepped in gently. "Let's take a short break," she said aloud. "Ava, could I see your drawings?" Ava brightened slightly, turning the sketchbook around. The pages were filled with charcoal portraits, faces blurred at the edges, eyes clear and expressive. One page caught Claire's attention, a woman playing piano, her hands captured in motion, lines vibrating like sound waves. "She's beautiful," Claire said softly. Ava nodded. "That's my mum. I draw her when I can't sleep." Daniel looked at the drawing, his expression unreadable. "You captured her exactly," he said quietly. "The way she used to tilt her head when she played." For a long moment, the three of them stood in the same room, connected by the memory of a woman who had once filled it with music. Later that week, Claire met Ava for coffee again at the small cafe near Westridge Academy. The afternoon sun painted warm stripes across the wooden tables. Ava was in her usual corner seat, earbuds tucked in though no music played. "He's changing," Claire said after sitting down. "You notice it too, don't you?" Ava stirred her drink without answering right away. Then she signed, "He tries. But sometimes I think he's only doing it because he feels sorry for me." Claire shook her head. "I don't think guilt can sustain effort like his. He's rebuilding something he lost, not out of pity, but because he finally wants to listen." Ava's fingers moved slower now. "When my mom was alive, he worked all the time. Even on weekends, she used to say he was afraid of stillness. I think she was right." Claire replied, "Maybe now he's learning that stillness doesn't have to mean emptiness." Ava smiled faintly. "You talk like a therapist." "Bad habit," Claire said, laughing. "Comes with the job." When they left the cafe, Ava walked beside her, the silence between them comfortable. At the corner, Ava stopped. "You know," she signed, "my dad told me he burned pancakes again this morning. He actually laughed about it." "That's progress," Claire said. "That's breakfast," Ava signed, grinning. Then, more serious, she added, "Thanks for helping him. Even if it doesn't fix everything." Claire answered, "Sometimes it's enough to fix one small thing. The rest follows." The following Sunday, Daniel attended Ava's art showcase at her school. The exhibition hall was filled with parents, students, and the faint smell of paint and varnish. Claire was there too, at Ava's invitation. Ava's section featured a collection called After Silence, paintings in shades of blue, grey, and pale gold. Each piece captured sound without sound. A pianist's hands, a city skyline vibrating like a heartbeat, a single girl underwater, eyes open. Daniel stood before the last canvas, a self-portrait of Ava at the piano. Beneath it, the title read, "Listening Without Ears." He spoke softly, not realizing Claire was beside him. "I didn't know she could paint like this." "She's been telling you in color what she couldn't in words," Claire said. When Ava approached, Daniel turned toward her. His hands lifted hesitantly, then steadied. He signed, "I'm proud of you." Ava froze. The words hit her harder than she expected. "Really?" she signed, her movements small, uncertain. Daniel nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "More than you'll ever know." Ava's eyes shimmered. "You mean it?" "I do," he said, speaking and signing together. "You're extraordinary." She smiled, a true, open smile, and hugged him. The cameras from the school paper caught the moment, but neither of them noticed. After the event, while students packed up, Claire watched from a distance. The connection between father and daughter was still fragile, but real now, like glass reforged from shards. Daniel approached her quietly. "She wants me to come to her next show. I didn't even have to ask." "That's how it starts," Claire said. He nodded, looking toward Ava. "I wish Elise could see her now." "She would be proud of both of you," Claire said softly. As the crowd thinned, a representative from the Mercer Foundation stepped onto the stage to make an announcement. "In honor of Elise Mercer," he said, "we are establishing a scholarship for students pursuing art and accessibility in communication." The audience applauded. Ava's smile faltered. She looked at her father, her hands trembling slightly. "You didn't tell me about this?" she signed, her expression darkening. "I wanted it to be a surprise," Daniel said. "It's for you, for your future." "I didn't ask for this," she signed, backing away. "You never ask me anything, you just decide." "Ava," he began, but she was already turning, walking toward the exit. Claire started to follow, but Daniel shook his head. "Let her go," he said quietly. His voice was tight, regret already threading through it. The applause had faded. The room felt hollow again. Claire looked at him. "You were so close," she said gently. He nodded once, staring at the door his daughter had just walked through. "I still don't know how to stop ruining everything I touch." Outside, the rain had begun to fall again, soft and steady against the glass. And somewhere beyond that, Ava walked alone under the storm. The echoes of her father's gesture chasing her through the wet streets. Proof that love, even when spoken in silence, can still be misunderstood. The rain had turned into a steady downpour by the time Ava reached the school courtyard. She didn't seem to notice it soaking her dress or darkening her hair. She kept walking until she found an empty classroom, pushed the door open, and sank into a chair. Her hands trembled in her lap, her anger pulsing through every movement. A few minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then Daniel appeared at the door, his suit jacket damp, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Ava," he said quietly, breathing hard, "please don't walk away like that." She lifted her hands, her signing sharp and fast. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore." He shook his head. "I didn't mean to upset you. The scholarship was supposed to be a gift." Claire appeared behind him, having followed at a distance. "Maybe let her speak first," she said softly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Ava's signs came quickly, each motion striking like thunder. "You created a scholarship in Mom's name without telling me. You used her memory like a press release. You made a decision about my future without asking what I wanted." Daniel looked helplessly at Claire. "She's too fast. I can't understand all of it." Claire stepped closer, translating for him in a low, steady voice. "She's saying she feels you made choices for her again, just like before. That you turned her mother's name into something public instead of personal." Daniel's voice rose, tight with frustration. "I thought she'd be proud. It's a full year of study in Paris, the opportunity of a lifetime." Ava's hands flew again, angry and precise. "I don't want Paris. I want Harvard. I've worked for that since I was 15. "She says she doesn't want it," Claire told him quietly. "She wants Harvard." Daniel's composure began to crack. Harvard will still be there after a year. She doesn't understand what she's turning down. Ava's next signs were almost violent in their intensity. "You never listen. You decide, you command, and you call it love. You sent me away once, and now you're doing it again." Daniel flinched as if struck. "That's not fair," he said, voice low. "Isn't it?" Ava signed, tears streaking down her face. "You sent me to boarding schools after Mom died. You visited when it was convenient. You didn't even learn to talk to me. Do you know what that felt like? To be deaf, alone, and abandoned by the only parent I had left. Claire's voice trembled as she translated. The words filled the empty classroom like a storm breaking open. Daniel tried to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, he said, "I thought I was protecting you. I thought those schools would give you what I couldn't." Ava signed slower now, exhaustion mixing with fury. "And what couldn't you give me?" Daniel's voice broke. "Understanding." For a long moment, no one moved. Then he continued quieter, the words heavy with memory. "I couldn't look at you without seeing the crash. The rain that night, the headlights, the sound of metal. I see it every time I close my eyes. Every time you looked at me, all I could see was what I lost and what I failed to save." Ava stopped signing. The silence that followed was different now, less angry, more fragile. She raised her hands again, slowly this time. "You sent me away because you couldn't stand to look at me." Daniel's throat tightened. "Because I couldn't stand to see how much I'd hurt you." Her hands trembled as she signed. "You could have learned. You could have tried." He nodded. "You're right. I could have. I should have. I was a coward." Tears blurred Ava's vision. Her sign slowed, softer now. "So why now, Dad? Why are you doing all this now?" Daniel took a step closer. "Because I watched you at that gala, standing alone while everyone celebrated me. Because I realized I'd built my whole life around success and somehow failed at the only thing that mattered. I can't undo the years I lost, but I can learn to speak your language now, before it's too late." Ava didn't move. Her expression wavered between disbelief and something like hope. She signed quietly. "You think learning sign language fixes everything?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but it's a start." For several seconds, the room was silent, except for the rain against the windows. Then Ava exhaled and signed again, her movements smaller, uncertain. "Why Paris? Why send me away again?" Daniel looked down, then back up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I saw your Harvard acceptance letter. And I realized that soon you'll be gone. I thought, if you went to Paris, I'd have one more year to learn how to talk to you before I lost you again." Ava froze. The admission hung in the air between them, raw, disarming. "You really think I'd disappear after college?" she signed softly. "I wouldn't blame you if you did," he said. She stared at him, the anger draining from her face, replaced by something much more painful. "You're so afraid of losing me that you keep pushing me away." Daniel's hands shook as he signed the words slowly, clumsily but clear enough for her to understand. "I'm sorry. I love you." Ava's breath caught. She hadn't seen those words from him, not spoken, not signed, in more than a decade. She took a step forward. "Say it again," she signed. Daniel repeated the motion, slower this time, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you." Tears spilled down Ava's cheeks as she reached out and hugged him tightly. He hesitated only for a second before wrapping his arms around her, holding on as if afraid she'd vanish. Over his shoulder, Claire stood quietly, her heart heavy and light at once. The storm outside had begun to ease, the sound of rain softening to a whisper. Daniel whispered, "Thank you," glancing toward Claire. Claire nodded once, her voice gentle. "You don't owe me thanks. Just keep talking to her." Ava looked at her father, then back at Claire, and signed, "He's terrible at signing." Daniel let out a quiet laugh. "I'll get better." "You'd better," she signed back, smiling through tears. They stood together for a long time, the space between them finally filled with something that resembled peace. Later, as Claire left the school, the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. She walked slowly to her car, thinking about what she had just witnessed. A man haunted by guilt, a daughter burdened by silence, and the fragile language that had finally brought them both back to life. In the rearview mirror, she saw them through the window of the classroom, still talking with their hands, awkward and imperfect, but talking all the same. And for the first time since the night of the gala, Claire smiled to herself. Some conversations don't need sound, they just need courage. 6 months later, summer had come to Seattle. The rain had given way to bright skies that reflected across the calm waters of Lake Washington. Inside Westridge Academy's auditorium, rows of chairs filled with parents, teachers, and students, waiting for the graduation ceremony to begin. Claire sat near the middle row, her heart full of quiet pride. She hadn't missed a single milestone in Ava's journey since that night in the classroom, the night everything began to change. On stage, Ava stood behind the podium in her graduation gown, her hair tied back neatly, her expression calm but glowing. The interpreter beside her waited for her cue. When the applause quieted, Ava raised her hands and began to sign her speech. Her movements were graceful, confident, each gesture deliberate. The interpreter's voice carried her words for the hearing audience, but Claire watched only Ava's hands, reading every nuance in silence. "In a world that often values only what can be heard," Ava signed, "I've learned that the most important conversations happen in silence, in art, in touch, in the space between words." She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience until it found her father in the front row. Daniel Mercer sat straight-backed, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his eyes glistening. Ava continued, her hands steady. "My journey from silence to expression wouldn't have been possible without two people. My mother, who taught me that music exists even for those who cannot hear it, and my father, who learned that love doesn't always need sound to be understood." Her signs slowed on that last line. Daniel lifted his hands, replying with quiet precision, "I love you." Ava smiled, her eyes bright. "I know," she signed back, before bowing slightly to a standing ovation. As the audience clapped, Claire felt her throat tighten. The sound of applause filled the hall, but what she heard most clearly was the quiet language that had once seemed impossible between them. After the ceremony, families poured into the courtyard, laughter and camera flashes echoing through the air. Claire stood aside, letting the Mercers have their moment. She watched as Daniel approached Ava, pride radiating from him. "You were incredible," he said, his voice steady but full. Ava signed, "I almost forgot my lines." "You hid it well," he replied, smiling. "Your mother would have been proud." "She would have told me to slow down," Ava signed, laughing softly. Daniel laughed too. "She probably would have told me the same." When Claire joined them, Ava turned, signing with excitement. "We have something to show you." Daniel took out his phone and opened a photo gallery. "We've converted the East Wing sunroom into an art studio," he said, handing the phone to her. The photos showed wide windows flooded with natural light, easels, canvases, and a small section filled with clay sculptures. "It's beautiful," Claire said quietly. "There's more," Ava signed. "Tell her, Dad." Daniel looked at Claire, his expression both nervous and proud. "We've started a foundation in Elise's name, the Mercer Foundation for Deaf Education and the Arts. It will fund art therapy programs, sign language education, and scholarships for deaf students." Claire blinked, caught between surprise and admiration. "That's extraordinary." Ava's hands moved quickly, her smile wide. "All staff are required to learn sign language, no exceptions." Daniel nodded. "We decided it together." Claire looked between them, the businessman who had once hidden behind silence and the daughter who had turned pain into art. "You both must be very proud," she said. "We are," Daniel replied, his hands echoing the same message in slow, deliberate signs. Ava added, "And we want you to be part of it, as program director, if you'll say yes." Claire stared at them, speechless. "Program director? Me?" "Who better?" Daniel said. "You're the one who taught us that communication isn't just about words, it's about actually seeing each other." For a moment Claire couldn't answer. The courtyard noise faded into the background, the laughter, the chatter, the music, all distant. In front of her stood the two people whose lives she had watched mend piece by fragile piece. Finally she found her voice. "I'd be honored," she said, the words quiet but sure. Ava threw her arms around her, her hands brushing against Claire's shoulder in a wordless thank you. Daniel extended his hand. "Welcome to the team," he said with the faintest smile. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, the three of them stood on the terrace of the Mercer house overlooking the lake. The sky glowed orange and violet, mirrored in the still water. Inside, Ava's new studio waited, paint tubes scattered, blank canvases propped against the wall, sunlight pouring through the glass. Daniel stood beside Claire, his tone thoughtful. When Elise died, I thought the music in this house ended forever. But today, I realized something. The music didn't end. It just changed instruments. Claire smiled. Sometimes silence is the bridge to a different kind of sound. He nodded, watching as Ava began to unpack brushes and paints in the studio beyond the glass. "She's my greatest work," he said quietly. "She's her own masterpiece," Claire corrected softly. He glanced at her, then nodded again, accepting it with a small, humbled smile. As the first stars appeared, Ava stepped out onto the terrace, a smear of paint on her wrist and a bright spark in her eyes. "You're both still talking about me, aren't you?" she signed teasingly. Daniel laughed. "Always." Ava rolled her eyes, then added with a grin, "You need to practice your signs more, Dad." He lifted his hands and signed slowly but clearly, "I will." They all laughed. The sound mingled with the rustle of evening wind through the trees. Later, as Claire drove home, she replayed the day in her mind. The speech, the applause, the light in Ava's eyes, the steady strength in Daniel's hands. The city lights shimmered on the wet asphalt, and the air smelled faintly of summer rain. She realized something then. This story hadn't been about silence at all. It had been about learning to listen, to grief, to guilt, to love. And as she turned onto her street, the words Daniel had said on the terrace echoed in her mind. The music hadn't ended. It had simply changed instruments. The sound had returned, not through voices or strings, but through hands, through forgiveness, through the quiet courage to speak again. And somewhere on the edge of the lake, in a house once filled with silence, that new music played, steady, wordless, and endlessly alive. Autumn came quietly that year. The air around Lake Washington turned crisp, and the trees that lined the Mercer estate burned with red and gold. The house, once filled with silence, now pulsed with new life. Students visiting the art studio, volunteers learning sign language, and the steady hum of voices and hands blending into a rhythm of purpose. The Mercer Foundation for Deaf Education and the Arts had officially opened its doors. Claire stood in the newly renovated atrium, watching a group of children gather around a long table covered with paints and clay. Some were deaf, some hearing, but they communicated easily, hands moving, faces bright, laughter filling the space without needing sound. Daniel entered the room carrying a stack of brochures. He had changed, in small but unmistakable ways. His movements were slower, his voice softer. His phone, once glued to his hand, now stayed tucked away in his jacket pocket. "Looks like it's working," he said as he stopped beside her. Claire smiled. "It's more than working. It's alive." He nodded, watching as one of the volunteers helped a boy shape clay into a small sculpture. "You remember the first day I called you?" he said quietly. "If someone had told me we'd end up here, I would have laughed." "Maybe that's why you needed to make the call," Claire replied. "You were running out of reasons not to try." Daniel laughed softly. "You always make it sound simple." "It isn't," she said, "but you made it possible." Ava appeared from the hallway, her hair tied in a messy bun, her hands still smudged with charcoal from a drawing class. She approached them with the same quiet confidence that had grown in her over the past months. "The kids are amazing," Ava signed with enthusiasm. One of them drew a picture of a wave and called it The Loud Ocean. Daniel laughed. "That's a good title." Ava signed, "It is. You should see how they communicate. No one's teaching them to talk louder. They're teaching each other to see better." Claire's voice softened. "That's what your mother wanted, you know. A world where sound wasn't a requirement for understanding." Ava looked at her father, signing slowly. "Do you think she'd be proud?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then answered both aloud and in sign. "I think she already is." The three of them stood together, watching the children at work. The air smelled faintly of paint and autumn rain, and through the wide glass windows, the lake shimmered under pale sunlight. Later that afternoon, a photographer from a local magazine arrived to cover the foundation's opening. Daniel, Ava, and Claire gathered in the courtyard for photos. The reporter, a woman with a bright scarf, asked, "Mr. Mercer, what inspired this project?" Daniel took a breath before answering. "For a long time I thought silence was an obstacle. Now I understand it can be a language of its own. This foundation isn't just about communication, it's about connection." "And your daughter?" the reporter asked, smiling toward Ava. "She seems to be at the heart of it." Ava signed her answer, and Claire translated smoothly. "My mum taught me that music isn't sound, it's expression. This place is where expression lives." The reporter nodded, clearly moved. "That's beautiful. And you, Ms. Holden? What's your role in all this?" Claire hesitated for a moment, then said, "I just helped them remember what they already had, the ability to listen." The photographer took the final picture as they stood together under the soft light of a setting sun. That evening, the Mercer house glowed with warmth. Guests filled the rooms, the walls echoing with conversation and laughter. The foundation's opening gala wasn't grand or ostentatious. It was intimate, full of the kind of joy that came quietly and stayed. Daniel stood at the edge of the main hall, a glass of wine in hand. When he saw Claire walking toward him, he smiled. "You clean up well, Miss Holden." She returned the smile. "I could say the same, Mr. Mercer." He chuckled. "Do you ever miss teaching?" "I still am," she said. "Just on a bigger scale." "Fair point," he said. Then, after a pause, his tone softened. "You know, I keep thinking about something Elise used to say. Hearing without listening is the loneliest kind of silence. I used to think it was poetic nonsense. Now I think it was a warning." Claire looked at him carefully. "You're listening now?" He nodded. "I'm trying." A few minutes later, Ava walked to the small stage at the front of the hall. She raised her hands, signaling for everyone's attention. The room quieted, the soft hum fading to stillness. She began to sign, and the interpreter beside her spoke for the crowd. "When I was younger, I thought silence was a prison. Now I know it's a canvas. Every emotion, every thought, every connection. It all begins in quiet. My mother taught me that. My father reminded me, and Claire showed me how to live it." Her words were followed by applause, gentle at first, then rising, the sound blending with the sight of dozens of people signing their applause in the air, hands fluttering like wings. Daniel's eyes glistened. "She's remarkable," he said softly. Claire answered, "She learned from both of you." When the event ended and the guests began to leave, Daniel walked out onto the terrace for a breath of air. The lake reflected the lights of the house, trembling with small ripples. Claire joined him, standing beside the railing. "It's strange," he said after a moment. "For years I thought my life was built on achievements. Now I realize it's built on what I almost lost." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "And what you found again?" He turned toward her. "You gave me that chance." "You gave it to yourself," she said. Ava appeared in the doorway behind them. "You two are getting sentimental again," she signed, teasing lightly. Daniel laughed. "Guilty." Ava walked over and leaned against the railing. The three of them stood side by side, the night calm around them. For a while, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint chirp of crickets and the gentle lap of water against the shore. Then Ava broke the silence, signing slowly. "You know what's funny? I used to hate silence. Now it's the only thing that makes me feel at peace." Daniel signed back, his movements fluid now. "Because silence isn't empty anymore." Ava smiled. "No, it's full." Claire watched them, her chest tightening with quiet emotion. The girl who once refused to be seen was now shining. The man who once couldn't speak had learned how to listen. And in that stillness, under the soft lights of the foundation they had built together, the silence spoke louder than words ever could. The first snow of winter came early that year, brushing the trees around Lake Washington with soft white. The Mercer Foundation had settled into its rhythm, classes running, students laughing, and the soundless energy of creation echoing through its halls. Claire arrived early one morning to find Daniel in the studio, standing before a half-finished sculpture. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was clay on his hands. He looked up when she entered, slightly embarrassed. "You're here early," he said. "I could say the same," Claire replied, setting her bag down. "You've been working on that since last week, haven't you?" He nodded. "It's supposed to be Elise, or maybe what I remember of her. Every time I think I've got her expression right, it feels wrong again." Claire stepped closer, studying the sculpture, a woman's face, calm and strong but unfinished around the eyes. "Maybe it's not about getting it perfect," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about letting her live in the imperfections." He looked at her, then at the clay. "That's what Ava said yesterday." "She's right," Claire said. "She usually is." Daniel smiled faintly. "You two have that in common." A few minutes later, Ava walked in, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck, a flurry of snowflakes melting in her hair. She grinned when she saw them. "You're both up before sunrise," she signed, amused. "Your father's trying to become a sculptor," Claire said, laughing. "I can see that," Ava signed, tilting her head as she examined the clay. "It's good, Dad. It's not Mom, but it's you remembering her." Daniel hesitated, then signed back carefully. "That's the idea." Ava smiled at the effort. "Your hands move better now," she signed. "You're getting fluent." He laughed quietly. "I had a good teacher." For the rest of the morning they worked side by side, Ava sketching designs for a mural, Daniel shaping the clay, Claire helping a group of children in the adjoining classroom. It was ordinary, peaceful, and full of life. By midday the sun broke through the clouds, sending thin beams of light across the studio. Claire took a break by the window, watching the children outside play in the snow-covered garden. Daniel joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. "You ever think about leaving teaching?" he asked. Claire smiled. "Sometimes. But then days like this happen, and I remember why I stayed." He nodded. "Ava says the same about art." They stood in silence for a while, before Daniel spoke again, his voice lower. "You know, when Elise died, I thought memory was punishment. Every image of her was a reminder of what I'd lost. Now I see it differently. Memory isn't punishment. It's the heart trying not to forget what matters." Claire turned toward him. "That's what healing looks like." He exhaled slowly. "Do you think that's what this is? Healing?" "I think it's what it's always been," she said. "You learning to forgive yourself." That evening, the foundation hosted its winter exhibition. A gallery of art from the students displayed under strings of golden lights. Parents and donors filled the space, but the air still carried the intimacy of something deeply personal. Ava stood near one of the main displays, a wall-sized mural she'd spent 3 weeks painting. It depicted a pair of hands reaching through water toward a burst of light. Beneath it, the plaque read, "To the ones who taught me how to listen." When Daniel saw it, his breath caught. "She never told me what she was painting," he said softly. Claire smiled. "She didn't need to." Ava approached them, signing quickly with excitement. "Do you like it?" Daniel's answer came both in words and hands. "It's beautiful, it's everything." She signed, "It's us." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, it is." Ava gestured toward the small stage across the room. "I'm supposed to give a short speech soon. You'll help me translate?" Claire shook her head. "You don't need me anymore." Ava hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe not to speak, but stay anyway." When the crowd quieted, Ava stepped onto the stage, the mural behind her glowing under soft light. She began to sign, her movements fluid, expressive. The interpreter beside her spoke her words aloud. "When we began this foundation, it was built on silence. My father and I didn't know how to talk to each other. We only knew how to remember what we'd lost. But silence isn't empty. It's full of everything we never said. It's a place where love can wait until we're ready to find it again." She paused, looking at Daniel, then at Claire. "My father taught me that even broken voices can still sing, and Claire taught us both that listening is the purest form of love." The room fell still, the kind of stillness that hums with emotion. Then the applause began, not loud but deep, resonant, and filled with something more than approval. It was gratitude. After the event, As guests filtered out and the lights dimmed, Daniel walked with Claire to the edge of the lake. The snow had stopped, and the reflection of the house shimmered on the water like a painting. He said quietly, "You know, Elise used to bring Ava out here after dinner. They'd sit on that dock and play a game, trying to guess what the stars were saying to each other." Claire smiled. "What did they decide?" He looked up at the dark sky. "That stars never stop talking, even when we can't hear them." They stood there for a long while, the cold wind brushing past, the quiet of the lake surrounding them. Then Daniel turned to her, his voice steady. "When you first came here, I thought you were here to help Ava. I didn't realize you were here to help me find her again." Claire met his gaze. "You found her yourself. You just needed to remember how to reach." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess the lessons worked both ways." Back inside, Ava was laughing with the students, her hands moving fast as she told a story in sign. The light from the chandeliers caught in her hair, and for a brief moment, she looked exactly like Elise. Daniel watched her, his expression full of peace. "I don't see the accident anymore when I look at her," he said. "I see her mother's strength." Claire answered softly, "And your heart learning how to remember without pain." Ava caught their gaze and signed from across the room. "You two are talking again, aren't you?" Daniel laughed. "Always." As the last guests left and the lights dimmed further, the house grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of loss. It was the silence of completion, the kind that comes when every word that needed to be said has finally been spoken. And in that stillness, where the echoes of grief had once lived, there was only warmth, memory, and the soundless truth of what the heart remembers. Spring returned to Lake Washington with quiet grace. The ice melted from the edges of the shore, and the Mercer Gardens woke from their winter sleep. The foundation's courtyard filled again with voices and the soft movement of hands, children signing stories, volunteers teaching, laughter echoing beneath the high glass windows. Claire walked through the building, stopping now and then to greet the students. She paused at a small classroom where two young girls were signing back and forth, their faces bright with excitement. They noticed her and waved. She waved back, smiling. It was the same room where Daniel had first struggled to spell his own name. Down the hallway, Daniel stood by the open piano room, the one he had restored just a month ago. The grand piano, polished and silent for years, had returned to its place by the tall window overlooking the lake. Its keys gleamed in the morning light, untouched but ready. When Claire entered, he turned slightly. "I never thought I'd see this back here," he said quietly. "I didn't think you would either," Claire answered, "but it feels right." Daniel ran his fingers gently over the keys, not pressing them down. "Ava wanted it. Said silence doesn't mean music has to die." "She's right," Claire said. "Sometimes silence is just a rest between notes." He looked at her, thoughtful. "You sound like Elise." "I think I'd have liked her," Claire replied. "She would have liked you," he said, then smiled faintly. "She had a way of knowing good people before anyone else did." A soft knock came from the door. Ava stood there, a folder in her hands. Her face carried that mixture of youth and certainty that came from having lived through something and survived it. "I need both of you for something," she signed as she walked in. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" She handed them each an envelope. "Open it," she signed. They did. Inside was an invitation, thick paper, carefully printed. The Mercer Foundation Summer Exhibition, The Language of Forever. Claire read it out loud. "You're hosting your own show?" Ava nodded, smiling. "My first solo exhibition. It opens next month. The theme's about memory, connection, and silence. You both have to come." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You've come a long way from sketching at coffee shops," he said. "I had good teachers," Ava signed, glancing between them. "Your mother would be proud," Daniel said softly. Ava's hands slowed. "I hope so." He stepped closer and signed carefully. "She is." The afternoon of the exhibition arrived warm and bright. The gallery stood downtown, filled with white walls and soft lighting. Guests moved quietly through the space, their attention drawn to Ava's paintings. Each canvas seemed alive, vivid blues and deep golds, the same colors that had once hung on the Mercer mansion walls. One painting drew everyone's eye. The Sound Returns. It showed a figure sitting at a piano surrounded by water, the reflection shimmering into another figure below, a woman, serene and smiling. Daniel stood before it, still as a statue. "It's Elise," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava joined him, signing slowly. "It's her, but it's also you, because when you brought the piano back, you brought her memory home." He looked at her, emotion tight in his throat. "You see more than anyone else ever could." "That's what you taught me," she signed, "to listen with my eyes." Across the gallery, Claire watched the two of them. For the first time, their movements were perfectly in sync. Father and daughter speaking fluently in silence, their gestures flowing like conversation long overdue. When Ava took the small stage to speak, she didn't need an interpreter. Everyone in the room had a small translation card in hand, printed with her words in English. She began to sign slowly, gracefully, each motion deliberate. "I used to believe silence was a wall," she signed, "but now I know it's a door. You just have to learn how to open it." The audience watched, transfixed. My mother gave me art. My father gave me courage. And Claire taught me that sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop trying to make noise. She paused, smiling toward them. "This exhibition is for them, and for everyone still learning the language of forever." When the applause began, it wasn't thunderous, but warm and lasting, the kind that filled the heart rather than the air. Later, as the evening light turned gold through the gallery windows, Daniel found Claire standing near one of Ava's smaller pieces, a portrait of two hands reaching across an invisible distance. "She's not a child anymore," he said quietly. "No," Claire replied. "She's something even better. She's free." He looked at the painting again. "Do you ever think about how strange life is? How we spend years chasing what's gone, and the moment we stop running, it comes back in a different form?" "Every day," Claire said softly. Daniel hesitated, then spoke again. "You changed both of our lives, Claire. You gave me back my daughter, and in a way you gave me back myself." She looked at him, her expression warm. "You just needed someone to remind you where to start listening." He smiled. "Still, I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You've already paid it," she said. "You made silence into something that speaks." Outside, the sun was setting over the city. They stepped onto the balcony overlooking the street below, where people still lingered, talking quietly, their hands moving in soft patterns. Daniel leaned against the railing. When Elise used to play, she'd end every concert the same way. One last note, held just long enough to fade into silence. She said that was the part that stayed with people, the space after the sound. Claire nodded. "The silence that lingers." "Yes," he said. "That's the real language of forever." Ava joined them a few minutes later, holding 3 glasses of sparkling cider. She handed one to her father and one to Claire. "To the end of silence," she signed, smiling. Daniel clinked his glass gently against theirs. "To what silence taught us." Claire added, "To what comes after." They drank quietly as the city lights began to glow below, the evening settling in around them. Inside the gallery, Ava's final painting hung alone on a wall near the entrance. It was small and simple, just 2 hands touching in the center of a white canvas, the space around them alive with faint strokes of light. Beneath it, a handwritten note read, "For my mother who played the song, for my father who learned to listen, for Claire who taught us both the words." As the night deepened, music began to play softly from the piano inside. A recording Elise had made years before, rediscovered and restored. The melody was slow, tender, full of memory. Daniel listened, his eyes wet. "That's her," he said quietly. "I'd forgotten the sound." Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. "Now you'll never have to again." Claire stood beside them, her heart full. The room around them shimmered with quiet, with life, with all the things they had lost and found again. The song played on, reaching its final note, then dissolving into stillness. No one spoke. The silence that followed was not the silence of grief or guilt or emptiness. It was the silence of peace,